Hey there, welcome to TGM's Legal Nuggets, where knowledge meets inspiration. If you're looking for insightful content that informs, empowers, and transforms, this is the place to be. Don't miss out. Hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications. Join the community and let us grow together. See you inside. The ongoing spate of violence between herdsmen and farmers in northern Nigeria, particularly in Plateau and Benue states, reflects one of the most protracted internal conflicts in modern Nigerian history. If you take a look at it, these hostilities have escalated from mere land disputes to full-blown acts of terrorism, murder, arson, poisoning, and destruction of livelihood. Welcome again to TGM's Legal Nuggets, where we talk on societal issues, giving legal perspective to these issues. We want to thank you for your support. We want to thank you for subscribing to our YouTube channel, for following us on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. We thank you for your engagement. We want you to keep the engagements coming. Keep liking, keep following, keep sharing, and keep commenting on our content. We appreciate you. So today we will be talking about the topic herdsmen and farmers clashes in northern Nigeria, a brewing war. Is that going to be, the ice on the cake, the icing on the cake that will bring about another war in Nigeria? Well, we just hope it doesn't come to that. Now, if you take a look at this, given your experiences, given reportage on media, conventional media and social media, what is the nature and character of these attacks? Because definitely there are going to be traces, they are going to be systematic, and there would be, historical facts, historical precedents of how these attacks are orchestrated. Now let us take a look at the herdsmen attack. Now, these are often carried out in groups, sometimes at night, most times at night, involving the use of sophisticated firearms, machetes, and petrol bombs. You understand? They throw these petrol bombs and then they light it up, and then because the nature of the houses you have there are such that are inflammable, you understand, they catch these fires and then they burn to the ground. Now usually villages are invaded, homes are touched, that is lighted, and then unsuspecting farmers, men, women, and children are brutally killed. Now they are brutally pied, let me put it that way. Several attacks, follow patterns of reprisal or territorial dominance. Now, one of the major arguments people give is to the effect that the Fulanis in the north tend not to forgive. And when you attack them, say in the year 2020, 5 years later, they might come back to give you a reprisal attack. And another thing is political dominance and territorial dominance, you understand? Because they are nomadic in nature, they feel that they have the right to still conquer. But again, the question in Nigeria today is, do we still have acquisition of land by conquest? I think the Land Use Act, which is currently enforced in Nigeria, may have put an end to acquisition of land by conquest. Again, let us take a look at the farmers' retaliatory attacks. Now, farmers, what is the nature and character of their own attacks? Or should I say a revenge, pattern? Now, farmers in affected areas, particularly in Plateau and Benue, have been reported to lace their farmlands with poison crops or set traps, leading to the death of herders' livestock. This form of resistance is often motivated by absence of state protection and repeated destruction of their economic crops and means. Yes, of course, now because they've actually complained over a period of time and the state government, the federal government is not coming to their rescue, they then resort to self-help to try to protect themselves. because there seemed to be no help coming from any quarter. Now, at the end of the day, would you say they are actually going against the law in doing this, particularly putting into consideration where the state government or the federal government is not living up to its responsibilities? Now, let us talk about some factual examples. In Nigeria, obviously, there's been several reports about attacks, counter-attacks and attacks by herdsmen and farmers, in Nigeria. Now, in a community called Beji, and this was in October 2022 in Benue State, Fulani herdsmen attacked that community, Beji community, killing over 36 persons. The community was literally razed down. Until today, the herdsmen have not been brought to book. I wonder what the government is doing about all these attacks. Then again, in Miango, there was another attack in July 2021. Miango is in Plateau State. Now, in that attack, over 70 persons were killed by armed herdsmen during a raid. Homes and farmlands were destroyed. Now, the weapons usually wielded by these herdsmen are sophisticated weapons, AK-47 and the likes. Now the question would be, how do they come in contact, how do they come in possession and custody of sophisticated weapons that they use to orchestrate these attacks? Obviously, should we say there is arms proliferation, or should we say there is arms dealing going on that the government is closing its eyes to? The government needs to live up to its responsibility in trying to tackle these areas. A whole lot of people smuggle in firearms into Nigeria, and the Nigerian Immigration Service needs to live up to its responsibility to see how these are usually done. Again, in Makurdi in 2023, there was a poisoning. Now, farmers reportedly poisoned the cassava field, killing over 40 cows belonging to nomadic herdsmen. That was like a reprisal attack, a revenge attack by, the farmers in Makurdi. Again, in Agatu, there was a massacre in 2016. Now, that was one of the bloodiest, attack, with hundreds of persons killed by herdsmen in retaliation for the alleged killing of their cows. Now, the question that would come to the minds of a rational or a logical human being would be, if herdsmen do not walk about, would their cows be killed? If herdsmen do not walk about, would farmlands be destroyed? This is one of the questions that needs to be answered, and if we can adequately answer this question, then a whole lot of the problem would have been solved. Now, again, in a community called Bokos, there was an attack in March 2024. Yes, armed herdsmen attacked villages in Bokos local government area, killing dozens and displacing hundreds of persons. In fact, people who hitherto were occupying their indigenous, land mass community have now been turned into refugees because of the incessant attacks by herdsmen. Yes, so now, having been able to cite these factual examples and all that, of course, we've done a video before on this and we've given the legal perspective. Please go back to that video to tend to know more about the legal perspective, the approach with respect to tackling herdsmen attack in Nigeria. But again, we would need to just throw in some light with respect to the legal framework, governing this particular discourse. Now, under the Nigerian criminal law, particularly the penal code and the criminal code, attacks by the herdsmen are usually multifaceted, and they come under several crimes that have been codified under the criminal and penal code. You talk about murder, you talk about manslaughter, you talk about homicides, you talk about grievous bodily harm, assault, battery, and so on, malicious damage, and so on and so forth. Then again, under the Nigerian constitution, every citizen has a right to life. Nobody has the right to take the life of another citizen in Nigeria. Now, the penal code, like I've said before, actually prohibits culpable homicide. Yes, these are some of the offenses that are captured under the attacks and counterattacks by herdsmen. Now, again, we also have the Terrorism Prevention Act. This also criminalizes acts that are intended to intimidate or coerce a population, including mass killing. In fact, any killing that has to do with mass killing is an act of terrorism. Yes, and of course, if you take a look at the attacks, it is an attempt at genocide. It is an attempt to wipe out completely a particular community and its generation, which doesn't augur well with the prevailing laws of the land. Then again, we have the Animal Disease Control Act, which prohibits poisoning or harmful treatment of animals, but of course, I don't know if these laws are implementable or enforceable in Nigeria. Now, I haven't been able to talk about some of the legal framework. Like I said, if you want to get a comprehensive breakdown, go back to our previous video on this topic on our YouTube channel, Soteria_TV, and also Soteria-Television and Soteria TV on YouTube, and then on Facebook, TGM Amwero Esquire, on Instagram, Soteria_TV, TikTok, TGM Amwero Esquire, to be able to get access to some of our videos on this topic. Now, what is the legal implication of all these attacks and counterattacks by herdsmen and farmers? Now, herdsmen who kill, destroy or burn properties actually commit multiple crimes. And some of these crimes which they commit, as we've seen in reports, include terrorism, culpable homicide, and criminal conspiracy. Yes, because some of these attacks, the massacre, are usually done by a group of herdsmen and not just an individual. Yes, now farmers who poison livestock, or livestock, may be liable under laws that are related to malicious damage and cruelty to animals. Yes, and in some cases where humans are harmed, attempted murder or manslaughter may come in. So these are some of the legal implications, of these attacks that are perpetrated in the north. The attacks by herdsmen, the counterattacks by farmers, and so on and so forth. Yes, again, how should the government and the community respond to these issues? Have they been doing enough in responding to this issue? Is it just enough to visit the scene of the crime, give condolences words, and then retire back to your office without doing anything concrete to put a stop to the entire problem? For me personally, I think the government hasn't done enough. The government is not even doing anything to provide a lasting solution to this problem. Now, what are some of the feasible recommendations that we can give? Number one, there has to be an establishment of state police or community policing under a restructured constitution. Yes, we need to visit the constitution. We need to think about restructuring our constitution and make it workable to fit into the current reality. The problem with Nigeria is that most often than not, we tend to apply foreign solutions to our local problem, whereas our geography and our problems, which are indigenous to us, are very much different from what those foreigners actually experiences. So we need to begin to look inward, to begin to make laws in line with our current and local realities. Now, the constitution needs to be visited, and we need to do what we need to do. Again, the federal government must designate violent herdsmen group as terrorist organization. Yes, not just designating them as terrorist organization, they need to be brought to book. When one or two are used as examples and brought to public light, the others would be forced to sheath their swords. And I think the government needs to be proactive in this respect. Again, creation of grazing reserves and routes backed by law and community consent. Yes, I've actually given this recommendation before in our previous video. You can go back there, watch that video to see what we said about this. Now, prosecution of offenders regardless of ethnic or religious affiliation. Most often than not, religion and ethnicity guides the decisions that are made by Nigerians, and that doesn't make sense. We need to first of all put up humanity before ethnic and religious differences. Now, regardless of whose cows they are, regardless of whose ethnic nationality they belong, they must be prosecuted, in line with prevailing law. Then again, the use of technology like drone surveillance and all that to monitor flashpoint areas. It is notorious that the herdsmen move in the bush. Now, communities need to strategize and begin to use community funds to employ technological experts to cover areas that they cannot physically reach. Now, by so doing, they should have a proper coverage and proper security intelligence to secure their territories. Now, on the part of the communities, what are some of the things they can further do? Yes, local intelligence gathering is very, very important, and cooperation within security forces. Communities that share boundary need to work together to see how they can curb some of these herdsmen menace. Yes, if the herdsmen are coming into your community, intelligence should have been sent to the other community, and then steps which we've recommended in our previous video must be taken to see how this can be corrected. Then again, they need to avoid taking laws into their own hands through retaliatory attacks. Retaliatory attacks is not the way forward. Yes, however, when you're strategic, putting community funds into proper use for intelligence gathering, you would be able to avert some of these attacks before they actually occur, and then get the police and whatsoever government security agency that is, needed to cater for the situation. Community defense group must operate under the ambit of the law. We must say no to jungle justice, self-help. They must do everything they need to do under the law. Yes, now again, recently, the head of the DSS in Nigeria was actually heard, in a video stating that communities must harm themselves to fight against the encroachment, to fight against the invading herdsmen. Now, while the DSS boss has actually suggested communities to harm themselves, this is a very dangerous precedent without proper legal and regulatory framework. Now, before this is implemented, there needs to be proper legal and regulatory framework to cater for this. Actually, the Firearms Act in Nigeria prohibits civilians from possessing firearms without a license. Yes, now this call, if not properly managed, may degenerate into anarchy and harm proliferation, which of course would be a very sad one. But again, putting into contrast the incessant attack, the surprise attack, and so on and so forth, don't we think communities should begin to do better? That's actually a subject for debate, and which would need to be looked into critically for us to be able to reach a proper resolution on that issue. However, communities must do everything within their possible best to avoid surprise attacks. But again, the law should be structured in such a way that communities are given the leeway to protect themselves if the government cannot live up to its responsibilities. Yes. Now, the quietness of the government with respect to this issue actually is very loud and gives a cause for concern, because with all the attacks that have been going on, the government have not been able to do anything, particularly the federal government. They've not been able to bring these herdsmen to book. For a very long time in Nigeria, herdsmen have been attacking, massacring communities, killing, in fact, causing genocides, and so on and so forth. But the government have not been able to bring a single herdsman to book. And that quietness by the government is a serious cause for concern. Now, the question is, why has the federal government of Nigeria not decisively addressed the herdsmen menace in Nigeria? Why is it so? Now, should there be probably some consideration? Now, our guess would be that number one, it may be to ethno-religious bias. Yeah, basically, accusations have actually traced the government's reluctance to declare violent herdsmen as terrorists, despite evident atrocities. From communities to communities, particularly in Benue State and Plateau State, we've seen report physical live evidences of these massacres and attacks. But the government has been quiet about it, doing nothing about it. It's a cause for concern. So ethno-religious bias may be one of the factors to be considered. Then again, political patronage, allegations of links between powerful politicians and armed herdsmen actually persist. Should we actually begin to guess and begin to see as a reality that politicians and these herdsmen, these armed herdsmen, are actually working in tune? There's this suspicion, and then the quietness of the government is beginning to make that suspicion come into reality. Then again, there's the constitutional centralization. State governors are called chief security officers but lack control over the police or the military. And this doesn't speak well. You cannot be a chief security officer and at the same time your hands are tied to act. Perhaps if there were state police would have been properly armed to take care of this herdsmen challenge. Yes. So now, we need to ask this particular question. Is the federal government, with these premises that we've stated now, should we safely conclude that the federal government is involved in all this? Should that be our conclusion at this point? Now, this remains a hot debate because persons have actually been debating on this issue, and the debates continues. However, the refusal to allow for state-controlled police, failure to prosecute perpetrators, and the occasional defense of violent herdsmen by officials of the government, particularly the federal government, raise questions of complicity or gross negligence. And you begin to question, why would the federal government be backing and supporting attacks that are orchestrated by armed herdsmen? This doesn't speak well of the federal government. So should we then conclude and say that the federal government is involved in this? Now, I think this is it is high time we began to consider state policing in Nigeria. Now, I want to say this against the backdrop of the fact that people argue that state police would be used at the detriment of political opponents. To me, that argument does not hold water. The security of lives of persons within a state and their properties is much more important compared to the selfish interests of a political individual within a particular state. And perhaps, if not for the fact that politics in Nigeria is played in a skewed way, there should be proper mechanism to check the activities of the executive arm of government in any states by other arms of government in a state. So more needs to be done with respect to that. Now, what are some of the ways forward? What are some of the ways forward that could help to mitigate or curb or nip these menace in the bud? Number one, we need urgent constitutional amendment to allow decentralized policing in Nigeria. It is now a matter of urgency, and the government needs to begin to look at this area. Then again, legal and enforceable grazing regulations. It is not enough to make the laws, but the laws should be regulated. The laws should be enforced. And when the herdsmen begin to see the seriousness of the state to enforce these laws, then it might help to put a caution as to how they act. Then again, creation of farmer elder conflict resolution commissions. I don't know why the government has not actually looked into this direction. It is a body that needs to be set up that should immediately delve into issues that are coming up with respect to attacks by herdsmen and farmers. Then again, we need to start considering international sanctions and interventions, which may be necessary where the government fails to do this. But of course, there has been, the non-governmental organizations coming to the aids of people who have been attacked. Now, wait. You've actually enjoyed these nuggets to this extent. Have you subscribed to our YouTube channel? So please go over to our YouTube channel, click on the subscription button, the subscribe button, subscribe, go to the notification, click on the notification bell, like, share, and comment. Go to our Facebook page, follow us, like, share, comment, go to Instagram, do likewise. We appreciate you for your support. Now, we want to bring it to the attention of everybody that this legal nugget is just for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. For tailored legal advice and opinions, you need to consult your legal practitioner who would give you or properly guide you with respect to how you go about your peculiar situation. So I want to thank you again for being there. Thank you for engaging, liking, following, sharing our content. I want to encourage you to keep the engagement coming. We'll see you again in our next video. Thank you and bye-bye for being there.